I want to get back a bit in the conversation where you've mentioned Manet. And I would love to hear your professional expertise on that, because from the many different sources I've read, honestly, there's like this big argument, I guess, whether he's part of the Impressionism or he's not. What are your thoughts on that? Is he part of it or not?
Well, I have a really, clear answer. He's not.
He's not, okay.
He's not. Now, this doesn't mean that he was extremely important to the Impressionists. Mm-hmm. He was, older.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike Degas, who was his contemporary, they were both older than the Impressionists.
Mm-hmm.
He never showed with the alternate exhibitions.
Relation to them, yeah.
That the Salon des Refusés.
Yes.
He didn't show with the Impressionist exhibitions as Degas did, some of them anyway. He only showed at the Salon, the official exhibition space in Paris. And so, of course, he was refused, a lot. I think, though, that there is a sobriquet that we might use that is used in the field by some. And it comes out of Charles Baudelaire, who wrote art criticism and poetry and,
Yeah.
And he wrote a very famous essay called, he wrote two very famous essays, one about the Salon of 1846 and one called Le Peintre de la Vie Moderne, Painter of Modern Life, right? And he identifies something called the Painter of Modern Life. And he doesn't actually identify Manet, who is the person that we all now think, and people have thought for many, many years, he should have identified.
Yeah.
He identifies somebody who painted modern life, but not in an enduring way.
Mm-hmm.
So he identified a man named Constantin Guis, whom somebody likened to, somebody who would like paint for Bloomingdale's, the department store, right? And Baudelaire had this thing that in order for painting to be worthwhile and to stand, it had to be both ephemeral and enduring. Now, Constantin Guis had the ephemerality, had the fleeting, day-to-dayness, moment-to-momentness of modern life. But he didn't have the staying power. Manet had the staying power. And I think in a way, when we're talking about modernity, you really kind of do need both of those things together. Because you need to be on the pulse, but you also need to not have it be a flash in the pan. Yeah.
Yes.
And so Manet does that for me. And the other thing that he does is he really moves away so dramatically from illusionism. And he's so very painterly. Like I look at Manet and I think about how much white he uses.
Yes.
Everybody else, even Courbet, like when they were first painting, they would use a dark ground and then they'd build up the canvas from that. And so it never really looked very bright.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Impressionists got rid of that.
Yes.
And they painted directly on the right white canvas. And Manet was already giving the canvas so much brightness I think of the flesh tones and how much white is in them, the faces, how white they are, and that when he, models flesh, it's so pink and high value. That means, so mixed with white. And it's so brushy, his stroke. And I love looking at the way he will slash paint on.
Yeah.
In pretty much anything he paints. We had a little Manet still life at where I taught, just maybe only in 1.5 feet tall, of a still life of moss roses. And the reflections in it were just like, they were practically solid.
Wow.
Planes of light, So something aqueous that's being shot through with a plane of high value light. And so the things are already kind of dissolving. His lines are broken. He doesn't care about the integrity of the contours. When people looked at Olympia, they thought the canvas was dirty. And particularly the prostitute was dirty. That was the language they used. Because there was no middle value between dark and light. And so it was white or very high value, or it was black. And so in the shadow under her arm, it looked like he was showing underarm hair, which, you're showing like a nude.
Yeah.
You do not, really, you don't do it. Yeah. And so Manet is already, he and Degas, the painters of modern life, are already moving away, as did Courbet, which is why I think he's such a pioneer, from idealizing the subjects.
Yeah, this answers many questions and many misconfusions I came across. So again, speaking about impressionism, as I mentioned, this is my favorite discipline, and I find it very fascinating in terms, again, when it comes to the real aspect of it, the bond between the painters there, between Monet and Sisley and Renoir, and, their dedication to the art, going against the society perceptions and so on and so forth. So I would love to hear what impresses you the most specifically about Monet and Renoir. Like, what do you have any interesting stories about them, any interesting facts that fascinate you? What's the main accent that you associate them with?
I love the sensuality of the pictures. The enormous richness of the color and the texture. The fact that it's not that they don't use black at all, because that's a myth, but the color is so bright overall, and there's so much luminosity, right? I mean, everyone says that, and it's true, that the attention to weather and to its transient qualities, that sense of change from minute to minute, you can see, the moment before the storm clouds are going to erupt in certain Pissarro paintings, yes, along the river Oise. So you sense the quality of light on water, and the way we see how color plays on a surface, on an aqueous surface. I love all of that, I love how pretty the paintings are. But as a social historian, I also am very aware of what they're showing and what they're not showing.
Okay.
So a good example might be Monet's paintings at Argenteuil from the early 1870s. So he's based in Paris, but he goes out to paint at Argenteuil.
Yeah.
And he can go out there because there's a train,
Yeah.
which there hadn't been earlier in the century. And so he paints the Gare Saint-Lazare, the train station, from which he leaves to go out to Argenteuil.
Yeah.
And he goes and he stays there with his family. And one summer, he invites Renoir to come. And one summer, Manet actually comes, right?
Yeah.
And they're all painting.
Yeah.
And they're all studying the light on the water, on this tributary of the Seine, right?
Yeah.
And here's a really fascinating thing that is little known.
Oh,
That is, when Monet started painting Argenteuil, he was painting it in part to get out of the city, because the city was being increasingly built up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the growth of railroads in France without building up cities, without building up a commuter-style existence, without building up suburbia, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So all of these people are going out of Paris to paint, right? And they're sometimes living there, So Pissarro was living in Pontoise, and Monet, as you know, kept going further out.
Yeah.
So when he's painting Argenteuil, it's a very beautiful, not even quite yet suburb. It's a village, right? Yeah. But if you start to look closely, you'll notice that, these things that look like farmhouses, on the far shore or something, or, churches across the water. You might also see a little steam pipe. You might see the incursion of industry.
Okay.
And ultimately, why does Monet end up in Giverny? And why does Renoir, keep painting beautiful women in landscapes, mostly naked? They're not interested in showing the changes. First in the city, and then in what became the suburbs. They're showing us a landscape that is pretty much utopian. And Monet does this so beautifully. I mean, so magisterially. And he creates at Giverny his own environment. He gets permission to reroute the tributary of the Seine.
Wow.
So that it will flow where he wants to.
Wow.
And he, makes this huge lily pond, and he imports all these lilies, not only from France, but from Japan, from all over the world. This is all an environment he's created.
Wow.
So there's a kind of hermetic, utopian dimension to it. And, you know, I often thought maybe Monet is too pretty for me.
I see.
You know, too candy colored.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I don't like looking at it,
Mm-hmm.
but it was fascinating because I also knew that earlier work where you just saw industrialization peeking through, and then he turns his back on it. You know, after 1877, he doesn't ever paint Gare Saint-Lazare again. He doesn't paint Paris again. Not really. It's Pissarro who continues to paint Paris. And I don't get me wrong, I love them both. But what was fascinating to me also was that a friend of mine, Paul Tucker, a great Monet scholar, did a show on late Monet. And he brought together some pictures that we hadn't seen before, like paintings that were like of lily ponds, but the palette was not pretty. It was dark, and some of the colors were kind of sickly. And then he did this series called the Allée des Rosiers, the Rose Alley, and you see these the bridge, you know, with flowers, and you look through it, and some of these pictures are very dark, and I thought, these are dramatic in a way I've never seen Monet. And I was stunned by them. And they're not what one thinks of at all. You know, you think of the Orangerie and the great series of Nymphéas there. And, you know, some of them are tamer and more muted in their palette than others, but they're not like these. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, you know, it was the First World War. And his wife died. And he was having problems with his vision. Degas, too late in life, was having troubles with his vision. Whether you see that kind of sketchier quality as an enhancement or something else, it's interesting to know that there are changes in the life of the artist, larger historical events, and that people, even somebody like Matisse, whom we think of as so vibrant and full of life, this is because I've looked at him for years and I know, like, so much of what he's made. There are a few paintings that he made during the First World War where the palette's very monochromatic and the markings are very, well, they're a little savage for him. I think, in a way, to return to your question, Monet and Renoir, in particularly, are so beloved because we, in the 21st and 20th centuries, have all lived, most of us who are looking at Western art have lived in industrialized and so their kind of vision of the landscape, which is so buoyant, and indeed why we all go to nature, you know, and the German expressionists did it, albeit in a different way, right? You know, it it is, in a way, the place where we are soothed and comforted and distracted from metropolitan life or from incursions into what we knew as the natural landscape, which, has changed so much over the course of our lifetimes.
Wow. So do you think in general that they're more easily comprehensible because they are not that confronting with the art?
Yes, I think they're comprehensible also because they're dealing with a world that most people recognize easily. There's nothing very arcane about their content. It's either landscape or figures in a landscape, doing everyday things.
Mm-hmm.
It can be anyone. It's we're not looking at class particularly.
Yeah.
We're not looking at poverty. We're far away from realism, from 19th century, from Manet and Courbet.
Yeah.
So there's very little disturbing. And of course, that is absolutely antithetical to how they were understood when they were first shown, because they're also completely modern and people couldn't understand the style. But there's also something I think that's very important to the way that we see them and why we love them, which is that in the 20th century in particular, the sketch aesthetics of something that wasn't finished as a work of art became very beloved, and it hadn't been earlier. So when 19th century critics who were contemporary to the Impressionists said, these are esquisses, these are sketches, that was not a compliment. Au contraire, that these are not finished paintings was what they were saying. These are daubs. These are nothing worthy of interest, because the measure of an artist up until the 1860s and 70s was craft, was expertise, was finesse, was finish. In fact, there was even a term, le fini. So academic painting, like painting by people like Bouguereau or Gérôme, and my references are mostly French because that's my area of expertise in the 19th century. But, you can find that in other places, of course, too. That was a guarantee of their training. And so you weren't getting gypped, by somebody who just like slashing some paint on a canvas. So not that there weren't people who did that kind of thing earlier, who painted really loosely earlier, but certainly the Impressionists, pardon me, in the context of their time, were moving away from an expectation of finish.
Mm-hmm.
So the paintings often looked, very shiny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And very modeled.
Yeah.
That window onto the world thing I was saying earlier. Yeah.
Interesting.
I actually love talking to people about pictures. I love when people are interested in painting. I actually happen to love a particular, it's a very rare species. The scientist who loves art, you know, and a lot of those people to me are the most interesting people.
Amazing.
Because the ability to get outside one's discipline. And I actually thought that one of the things we might be talking about today is this notion of a kind of creativity that moves, that is fluid. You know, so many people are creative in one area, and they change constantly within that, you know, that field, whatever that field is. They may be even making a new field, right?
Yeah.
And then there are the people more like me who sort of step out.
Yeah.
Who actually have interests. And this is something that would be fun to talk about with you sometime. About, you know, were you from a young age, like really interested in art? Or did that come later? Because all the things that interested me, like when I was a teenager, they all came back into my life.
Wow.
And I think that's a very lucky position to occupy, but I don't think most people have that opportunity somehow. And so they may have an interest, but they're not like you who say that you're doing this podcast.
Yeah.
It's a passion project for you.
Yeah.
And that's what really got me.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, because I could see it, you know, looking at your interests in music, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and then of course your interests in science, you know, they're there. And then, you know, all of a sudden, here we are in visual art, you know? And so that's something we could certainly talk about. So do you want to ask like one or two concluding questions for now, and then we might talk again?
Yeah, let's do that. I would definitely love to have another whole separate conversation about the topics that you've mentioned, because actually this was the next phase of the conversation I wanted to go to. Because, you know, to follow up on what you've said, you know, I'm an educated engineer. You know, I'm coming from a very analytical family. You know, it was always math and analytics and numbers and all of that, you know. And for art, obviously, you know, I've discovered music and arts after that and so on. So for me, it's a very interesting field to reiterate what you've mentioned, to see how people's thoughts and notions and perceptions are developing through their life experiences. And I guess that's why visual art is so interesting to me, because it's another, it's another way for people to document their feelings and their human developments and to expose them in a visual way.